So how are things going?
They're going well. They're going well. It's Friday, so
Yeah, that's that is true. That's right. Make
how
things
are you
easier.
doing?
Doing great. Doing great. It is Friday. Just I was reading the book and doing some research before we talked today, and then time just flew by because I was actually just trying to get more and more into all these stories before we talked today. So it's a really good book. So I just really fascinated by everyone's stories. So yeah, so really great book. Really appreciate it.
Excellent.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and uh, that's about it. Do you have any questions before we start, or any?
Whatever you think I need to know. Otherwise, yeah, I'm in your hands.
Okay. No. Yeah, it would just help you to be laid back and no gotcha questions that I know of. I actually do not subscribe to gotcha questions quarterly, so we're good. We should be good there. So, uh,
Are you hearing a big hum from me?
no,
The
I'm not.
mic? Okay,
No,
good.
no. So, okay. Well, thank you, Steve, for joining us today. Um, your new book, Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries, User Research War Stories. Right here, for people watching us on the camera there. This is from Roosevelt Media Publishing, and recently came out. And then this is. Would you say this is a follow-up to your first book, interviewing users? Is that like?
I mean, it's another book by me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. Is it a follow-up? I think I approached it as like being this very different book. It was going to be about something very different. But I think as it's finished, I see it's got some similarities. I mean, interviewing users was a text, right? It's a pretty traditional Rosenfeld media book that's meant to say, here's how you go and do something. And I think this book comes at that, but in a very different way. Like, it's not the pedagogical framework, if you will, is storytelling, not explanation. So it is a follow-up, sure.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, just so people know, like the book is, and I also want to ask you questions about it. It's about user researchers going out into the field to ask questions and about I would say like just consumers of a product, but just how people understand, or just understand how people live their lives, I guess, in terms of that. Is that good? And I just wanted to like just frame the questions as, I'm not a user researcher, so but I am interested in all things that that contact with the web, and that's been like accessibility through design and through user research and user experience with that. So I've only done a little bit of user research, but that's only been. I have never gone out into the field, let's say, and actually asked for input from that. So why would you say, someone who's listening who also maybe in that same boat, why would you go out into the field and ask people questions?
Yeah, there's different kinds of research to answer different questions that you might have at a different stage in any product development process. So user research where you are being more open-ended, where you don't know what you don't know, where you want to understand, as you said, what people's lives are about. There's things you just can't learn unless you're in the environment. You know what I mean? Like it's all about what you don't know that you don't know. So we have ideas about how people are going to use the product that we're interested in developing, or what problems they're having. We have our ideas about that. But I think these surprises that you uncover when you go out in the world are really profound. There's so much contextual information about what people are doing. So if you have somebody come into your environment and sit down in front of your machine and log in your machine and start using a website, for example, what you're not seeing is the baby that's crying, the fact that they're doing this while they are making dinner, the fact that they have Post-it notes around the bezel of their monitor to tell them how to complete some task, the inspirational poster they have on their wall that really articulates the goals in their life that this tool they're using is meant to support. They're things we would never think to ask about because we don't know that they exist. So that context helps us understand so much more about people, and then helps us really drill down into like, what are they really telling us about their behavior, their needs, the unmet opportunity our company has to make changes. It's kind of if you think about usability testing as sort of a traditional research method, usability testing is about the artifact. Right? We've got a thing, we want to see if that thing is going to do its job. But at the other end of the continuum, and I think you kind of tipped this a little bit, the research can be about the person. Like, what is that person doing? What is life about for them? And then, using design and that kind of approach, we're thinking about the solution based on looking at them rather than looking at the thing. There's fancier words about generative versus formative research, which, that's not even in my vocabulary. I shouldn't even have brought it up, but that's another way to kind of slice up the world. So anyway, that's kind of a riff about why go out. Oh wait, can I add one more? Yeah, and so one more piece is that you have a very different interaction with someone when you're in their environment. There's I want to call it a humility. When you go to somebody's space and ask them questions about what do they use, how do they use it, why do they use it, what's working, what's not working, that creates a very different kind of conversation than asking someone to come to you. I mean, it really sets them up to share. And it's not even about sharing the personal things. It's about getting to a deeper level of truth that you can't get to in a more formal, kind of controlled in your environment. And not everything requires that. Not every design question or research question requires that. But when it does, I think it's just tremendously insightful and inspirational.
Yeah, I thought speaking of the humility part of it, I thought that another thing was I felt like this line that went kind of through most of the stories, and not all the stories I read, was about respect. For the you could say like customers, but the people you're interviewing, is respect for their lives and how they're living, and not that. One story was let me see what the name of it was. I don't have names for all of them, but somebody. But is it Jen Ayudice? Is that actually her name? Trust your gut story about making sure you trust your gut. There's 60 stories, so I won't give out the whole book in this thing, but there's over 60 stories that are documented in here. But the one I felt like just to prove the point about humility was that they're going to go research someone. Their main partner, or I guess their person who they were going to the survey for, says, no, I'm not going to go see that store, go to that building to see them. And it's like, okay, well, whatever. So they go and they realize like, well, this is not something that's very safe. So let's just cancel it. And they call the person, and so the person says, oh wait, yeah, I'm glad you just canceled, because I was just robbed in my own apartment complex that you're about to walk into. And it's like, oh, like, until I just realized, oh, well, you're actually going out into some parts of the world that you would never like go to. And then the other story, I felt like, I honestly thought you could probably make this into a TV movie or to a movie, was the story about was the enemy employee, which I thought was just I felt so. I'm not sure if it was a kind of respect for that, but there's just that someone who's been left behind by his company, has been scapegoated, and he's left alone in an empty building to open it up and close it each day. And when I say empty building, I mean like it sounded like, from what I read, like a multi-story building in which he's left alone in, and he's left with trying to come to a realization that his career is like over, pretty much, and comes back. And so as a user researcher, you have to go out and be just respectful in terms of talking to them and engaging with them and being part of their lives. So that's what.
And in that story, the researcher who's having that experience sort of fails a few different times to connect with this guy, and he, right, as you said, this guy's been scapegoated, left behind, sort of marginalized, and starts to kind of try to drive and control the interview. And the interviewer is sort of naive and thinks he's got all the best practices down and that he knows how to run a proper interview and connect with this guy. And, it goes very badly given the complexities and awkwardness of the situation. It goes badly. And then the researcher Raphael has this kind of moment where he summons up that respect. I mean, I think you nailed it. Like he summons up that respect and his own humility and finds a way to connect with him. And then he's listening to a guy that no one listens to. And then I think that starts to really make something interesting happen. And as he says, he learns all this stuff that he was never going to learn. So it starts off very dark and dramatic. And then, he kind of overcomes some of these challenges, which is interesting to watch in these stories as well. People do or don't succeed. Sometimes these stories are like, it just doesn't work. And sometimes people find very sort of surprising to them, given what they think they should be doing. They kind of find their own surprises in terms of how to connect with a new person with respect in a way that lets them have the conversation they came there to have.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about this book is, as a concept, is like it doesn't shy away from failures in the process of it. And so years ago, I wanted to write a book about the failures of building like large scale websites and talking to clients, and not only clients but agencies who are hired to build websites for clients, and just don't do that. That's my lesson, is that most people just don't open up about that because they seem that failure is bad, even though we talk about like fail often in our industry and I guess America. I'm not sure it's other industries, but being able to fail often is very important, just so like that's how you learn. And so, but writing stories about people failing is like businesses will never say like, oh, we succeed 100% of the time. There's never any mistakes, but when you're dealing with people and dealing with data, which has to be binary, it's just, ones and zeros, there's going to be mistakes. And so that book turned out to be totally different by the time we hit the publishing deadline. So, so it was really just a great, read just to talk about people's mistakes, but also not mistakes, but it's not like real mistakes, but just talk about how people also engage with the process. They're trying to do the right thing sometimes, but reality sets in and says like, you can't do this by the book, and what are you going to do about it? And I felt like there's I'm not sure it's mentioned in the book, but in research you said that there's like I think in interviews you mentioned like there's two things you could do. If things aren't going well, abandon the mission, and then or you have the decision to just keep going. I felt like that was like a really main important thrust in the book.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme in this book as well. And a question that I get asked a lot is, I mean, you mentioned Jen's research example where it felt dangerous to them. And I think of what a lot of these researchers grapple with in these stories is, the orthodoxy or the best practice is to do this. And so how do I know when not to do it? How do I know when it's dangerous? How do I know that this interview's itself, like imagine you get into the interview and the dynamic with the person isn't right. How do you know that you should leave? Or how do you know that this is just a waste of time and it's not going to get anywhere? And I think the two things you mentioned are exactly right. Like you sort of have to at least be committed to doing either and know that you have a choice, that you can walk away. Yeah, and and you can walk away from a project. It's like, you acknowledge your sunk cost and you walk away from a failing project. You walk away from an interview that's not going well. You walk away from an interview that's unsafe or uncomfortable. And there's many dimensions to that because it could be emotionally unsafe as opposed to physically unsafe. Or you stick it out, and that isn't necessarily stick it out to kind of because perseverance is good, but there is this element of you don't know if you don't keep going. But also, certainly for interviews, there is kind of a why not? If you're already there, I've had some experiences where it just seems like you're just going down into the deepest pit of failure, and sometimes things turn around, and that's kind of interesting. But also sometimes things don't turn around, but at least I had one interview where the person just had no ability to answer a question with any insight. He could kind of say, well, I do this and I do that. Well, why do you do these things? Well, I do this and I do that, and I like to do those things. Like, he couldn't give us anything, and it was kind of frustrating. But then at a point, it became a little comical, and so it was just performance art is too obnoxious a way to put it. But for me, I thought, oh, I'm just gonna like everything, all the social cues we have is like just to say give up. But I thought, oh, I'm just gonna keep asking questions. He's not unhappy with us being here. We've agreed to 2 hours of his time. Maybe if I talk about it this way, I'll get somewhere. Maybe it's to let me practice, a really difficult context that I wouldn't ordinarily come up against. Because I think of myself as pretty good at kind of connecting with people and getting to some uh, deeper takes than just the facts. I never could with this guy. I never could. But and so while it was sort of aggravating to do it, it was also sort of entertaining, and it was like free practice. I mean, I was already there. So there are sort of reasons to walk away and there are reasons to stay. And there's no set of rules that anyone can put in a book that you could read and say, the next time this happens, I'll know when to walk away. And what I like in these stories is seeing some of these researchers grapple with that tension and making different choices and not being sure if they made the right choice. And I think just to remind everybody and myself that both choices exist, right? Keep going, give up. And if you sort of know that you can do both, then you're not sort of stuck kind of on the treadmill. You can make an informed choice at that moment and then make it again in 5 minutes and make it again in 5 minutes. And really think about that you have these options. And I think, yeah, there's options that we don't, if we're sort of in the moment, we're really just, we're just dealing with the moment and we don't have the coping skill. So if you kind of, and who can, you're sort of stuck in a complicated moment. And so, if you take this book and the principles that are in it, two of them are like being able to do A and being able to do B, and just kind of holding on to that and knowing that, so that when the chips get down, you're like, oh yeah, I could do one or the other, and there's no right way to go.
I just do want to take a 1 minute break. Just take a second. I do want to track down that. I don't know if you can you still hear that audio issue that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I hear a hum.
Okay.
But like when I mute, I don't know. Do you hear the hum when I mute? And then when I talk, I get I can hear myself kind of feeding back staticky. So I could come up with I have some different. I'm going to get like a proper mic and a.
Yeah. Let's see if that works. It could be just something else that's different, but I know like when I'm not talking, my video comes on, and that usually means, and into the big screen, and that usually means that it's picking up my audio, and because I'm talking, but you're actually talking. So I just want to make sure that that hum isn't there on the audio track.
Let me plug something in and grab something then.
Okay, appreciate it. And I'll double check my audio settings too. We just had someone in the neighborhood mow their lawn, so that's awesome. Test. You know what? I did. Test. Test. That could be it. I think. Test.
So I could do this, and then just I could also go find a pair of headphones. So I don't know what's going to happen when you talk, if it's going to feedback.
Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Oops,
Oh, I'm not.
testing,
Wait, I need to change my speakers.
testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Check, check, check.
Check from me.
Yeah, I can hear myself. So
Coming back.
yeah, coming back.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll get a
so
pair of headphones.
okay, appreciate it so much.
All right. So let's see how we're doing here.
I think we're doing better. I think that's good.
Oh, you sound great. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think there was something on my end, so I jiggled the wires a little bit more. I think we're good. So okay, good. Appreciate it.
Sorry about that. I'm glad we're good.
No, no problem. Appreciate it. Okay. Let me just just do a clap here. There you go. So this is a collection of stories that we collected over the years, and actually the earliest one I could find was like that you mentioned was like you published was in 2012, I believe it was. What made you decide to start like publishing these stories from the field? Well,
Yeah, it's something I've been looking to do for a long, long time. I think I describe in the book the experience of being at a bar at a conference and sort of being early in my career and meeting other people just casually having those conversations like you do. And people started telling stories of just, oh, this happened. And it was it was like a little moment, but it was kind of profound. I realized, oh, there's this thing that we don't talk about, that it's not just me that this happens to. Like, this is what the professional community experiences. If you do this stuff for a little while, even, you start to have weird and interesting things happen. And it was entertaining as anything just to be talking about this stuff. And I thought, oh, there's an opportunity to collect these. And I didn't really know what that would look like. I think I proposed a couple of conference panels where we would just get together and talk about these things, and that didn't happen. Um, and so, we talked up front about interviewing users, my first book. And one of the things that Rosenfeld Media, encourages is kind of having a book that grows beyond the printed form. I mean, that just represents a point in time. And I started to think, that one of the things I want to tell people about research is you can learn to do it better. You can read this book and you can practice it. But one thing to do is just tell stories to other people about what happened. And I thought, okay, I'm going to create a repository for that. And so as interviewing users is kind of going to press, there's a link in that book. I realized, that link needs to have stuff there so that when the book comes out and people type that URL in, they're going to get to some amount of stories, and then that will start to generate more interest. So I worked pretty actively to solicit stories. I mean, it's one thing to have a repository for it, but they don't just come over the transom, as they say. You've kind of got to go and ask people like, hey, here's this project, here's the goal. These are stories about researchers, not about the research. Do you have anything to share? And so right back in whenever that was, I just spent what seemed like a long time just really, beating the bushes for stories. And, now I think it's a little easier to get stories because many people have them, but it's in book form. It's kind of established. It is a thing. So it's a little easier now, but I'd love to see it continue. I'd love to see it sort of be self-sustaining. It doesn't need to be my archive, but I'd like to see people just being willing to share stories with each other for the value that can bring. So, I'm leading that, of course, as part of these kinds of conversations and things I'm doing around the book. But Ideally, people pick this up and think, oh, yeah, we should have a little lunch meetup at my company, or I should go have coffee with somebody in the community and just share stories, because I think there's so much that can happen from that.
Right. I mean, it seems like it's an oral education most of the part, like these stories that they're passed down because it's things that you don't really find in a how-to book, like an instructional book. Is like, hey, these are, maybe like have an apprentice or like master, like someone will tell you like, oh, this was what you should avoid, or it's not something that you would written down. So like just to have a physical representation of this, and not just like a one-off entry in someone's blog that collects dust, the virtual dust out there that no one really reads. But just it seems like you've created this home for people to like share their user research stories, and so I think that's you know, and you said like, hey, it's a non-judgment zone, so don't worry about that. You can share these stories, and I feel like that's where I think like from the web development side, web design side, when I talk about my book, just I feel like there's still even though we say fail, it's there's still some shame involved, and people don't really want to share their stories. So you collect all these stories, and then I think where I want to go with that is just I don't know where I want to go with that. Just in terms of publishing stories, I feel like the stories themselves they're short, they're simple and sweet. What I like about them is that they are short and sweet, but uh, they also have some lessons to take away from. And I felt like um, how did you determine like which ones were the best ones for the book in terms of publishing rather than leaving some ones out?
Yeah. So I had this archive, maybe it was like 75 stories or something like that. I don't know what the exact number was. Um, and then the book publishing process is kind of interesting, right? Because you have to write a table of contents, like an outline, before you've written the book. Um, so, I'd been talking about these stories in a less formal way. Just sort of, I've been doing some conference talks and kind of saying, hey, here's this story, or there's this topic, or there's this, I could see what some of the groupings were. But in writing the book, I took a much more, I did a lot more analysis, and that's kind of stuff that user researchers love, right? You're taking all these stories, you're trying to find what are the patterns, what are the themes. So I went through and I like marked them all up and just looked at the different aspects of what was happening, what were these kind of, inflection points at which the story flipped, the inciting incident, as they say. What were some of the lessons? What were some of the contexts? So I just had this big jumble, and I started started trying to organize it and say, well, what are the key things that are going on here? Um, and so, I sort of came up with a structure that was like 85% of the way there. And then I went back to the stories and started kind of slotting them in and looked at, how well did they match. At that point, you have a few stories that don't fit anywhere. So I kind of went back and forth with my editor, like, does the story go in? And they're like, that story's okay. There were some that just they didn't fit, or they didn't seem as compelling for the way the book was shaping up. And then, of course, the structure evolves, and you realize, oh, it's actually about this. Excuse me. Um, it's actually about this, and so now the story goes here. And then the thing that happened was, you can see we're light on a couple of areas. Like there's a really important theme, but we only got one story about it, so you can't really make a chapter around that. So I had to go out and try to find some stories that would fit into some of those topics, which was also really fun. Because so there's this Venn diagram I won't try to draw with my hands, but stories in the archive and stories in the book, they're pretty close, but there's some stories that exist only in one realm or only in the other. And then as new stories come in, then of course that the diagram will kind of shift. Um, yeah, that was kind of the process.
Do you feel like that serves the stories better, or like do you feel like that's because like the book writing process is kind of a weird process because you have an idea for the book and then it's like, well, you have to write that table of contents like you mentioned, and then you're just like, oh man, I'm actually crystallizing my idea, and that's kind of scary and fun at the same time. So do you feel like the stories are better served in going this way, or do you feel like maybe I mean, maybe just try and put a square peg in the
Mm,
round hole?
yeah. So I was never going to do this as a book anyway. And then someone said, "Oh, you should publish them." And I thought, "Oh, maybe I will publish them." And the motivation for that was thinking that I like to think about a dusty blog post or a dusty web page. They all were online, but they were hidden because that's just kind of how like blog content sort of disappears. So I thought I had this repository, but what I had was a bunch of old blog posts. And so I thought, okay, just kind of concatenating them into print and putting them out in the world will give that archive sort of a physical representation, and people can kind of experience it that way. I just imagine this as sort of the simplest project, like sequencing them, maybe writing a little bit about like when you read like an anthology of science fiction or something like that. There's a little bit at the beginning that says, who this author is and where the story came from, but there's not a structure to it. It's just concatenated. Um, and That's not such an appealing prospect to book publishers. In fact, I had great conversations with Lou at Rosenfeld Media, and he said, "Well, I think there's actually a bigger book in there, Steve, if you want to put the work in to do that." And my thought was, well, I don't want to put the work in to do that, but he was he had a good vision for it, that there was more to be found here, and that what people want to purchase is the author's voice, and that's me. So he kind of assigned me a greater role than concatenator, if that would be a role. Um, and again, I kind of resisted that, but once I started doing it, once I saw what these groupings were, and I realized I could make every chapter deals with a theme, but it starts with an essay by me about that theme with some. Well, they're all different. They kind of pull from pop culture, they pull from science, they pull from my own research experience, and they kind of set up the frame of those stories. And then there's takeaways for each of them. So, your question was, are the stories better served? I've always felt like the stories themselves were like, every time I would get a story and publish it, I felt like, oh, this archive, this gestalt thing, the sum of all these stories was getting better and better and better as they were kind of just, adhering around to this sort of roughly shaped set of stories, um, and that not every story needed to be, oh man, that's incredible, but it still could move the collection forward. Um, so I'm sort of less concerned with the individual stories and more about what they provide collectively. And I was failing to do that with the blog. It just was it didn't have that, it didn't level up to that gestalt. I think the book does. So I think it serves the stories, if that's the singular, if that's the collective noun. I think it serves the collective noun of the stories really, really well, because you can just flip through and read them, but you can also pull a lot more out of them. And that was all implicit in the blog and is now explicit with the book. Um, yeah, does it serve the stories themselves as sort of individual entities well? I think so. I mean, people that wrote them are, for the most part, very excited to be part of this. So I don't think they feel like they were not served. Yeah, I'm just gonna, as the author of the book, I'm gonna say I'm gonna come out in favor of the effort to produce it in this form.
Yeah, yeah. I think definitely as standalone art stories, I think they live on their own. But I do like the fact that you mentioned that you have an essay before each theme. Each chapter has like a theme, and then you have an essay before. But then you have the end, the bullet points. I guess the hit the underscore everything. So as taking a whole, like you actually, I think you actually kind of like Legos in a way, if you will. Just try to build a better uh, point with the stories, and it's what stories are about. Like using stories to tell your points, and if you have stories, that help sell your point better, the better for that. And if there's themes involved, I think that'd be better too. And I think and each story is different. Like, I felt like, and in your book, it's your call in terms of managing which story goes to which theme. And so, yeah, I think, no one's ever done a book like this. So yeah, so there you go. It's awesome. So there you go. It's your take on it. I do want to take a step back and maybe take a look. I do want to examine, as someone not used to doing user research, and not in that world, day to day, if you will. You mentioned earlier talking about doing user interviews, that you'd go out to determine what you don't know. Like, you don't know what you don't know. There's that. How would you? What is that leap in terms of knowing that you need to do that? Then, like you say, like, if a company needs to know that they need to go out and find out what they don't know, how is that usually precipitated? Like, what usually happens in that regards?
Yeah. I think there's pain felt in an organization when there are decisions that need to be made, but no. I had a client that talked about it this way. He said, "We have what he said. I think he said we have." He put it. I'm not going to be able to put it as well as he did. We have data, but no belief. It was something like that. Um, so it's not like user research of various forms is not a practice. At many companies, it is so much far more established than, back in the day when I was just a pup. I mean, it was a weird thing and no one did it. Now there's lots of activities to learn about customers and their behavior and their desires and their problems and their needs. But sometimes that stuff is sort of reactive and maybe tactical. And I think people in companies or on teams find themselves, trying to solve problems, make decisions, create consensus, align around an approach or a vision. And if there's nothing underneath that, then it's sort of contentious. You either have to have someone just dictate, well, we're doing this because I say, what is that? That's known as what? Designed by Steve. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm not the Steve in that reference.
Right.
So I think that it's that I see that a lot. That and so what I mean, some companies are good at kind of doing this. Sometimes they just even need some help at, like, how do we even say what the problem is? Like, what is the question? And sometimes I'll have these conversations where they say some of what I just said, right? We just struggle internally. I had a company that was a technology ingredient company that said, our whole business is around providing quality for these certain kinds of technical experiences, like the one that we're having now. We already kind of did some troubleshooting around quality of audio and video, and so those kinds of things. And he said, this person that I was working with said to me, we we talk in the hallway about quality. We talk in meetings. It's kind of in everything that we do. We do not have a shared belief around what quality is. So in terms of how do you market these kinds of ingredient technologies, how do you prioritize your development? How do you do anything when the thing that they have been making, the technology they've just been innovating on for decades and decades, it's sort of implicit, and that can get you so far, but the world changes.
Right.
When they were innovating on quality with technical communications, this thing that we're doing, or that anybody who's watching this is doing, didn't exist. So that conversation changes as new platforms become available and new behaviors become available. So they identified that, right? We don't know how to have the conversation internally, and we need some way of understanding that better so that we can position our products, we can drive our development, we can figure out what innovation means, we can figure out how to message and how to partner. It was really something very strategic. And you see that even in more, so that's a very sort of big picture hand wavy one, but You see it in people that have products out on the market. They have kind of a use case. I talked earlier this year. I guess it's a hot topic, so it's certainly happened to me several times. I've talked to companies that are doing streaming music solutions. There's many players out there. We have sales numbers and number of streams and features and so on. And it's a new business, but it's not. They are big businesses that are acting with a lot of sophistication and maturity as a profession. But yet they have sort of their beliefs about what people do and why they do it are based on like people that come into those companies that have worked in the music industry for a long time, or people
Right.
that have big streaming collections themselves, or 48,000 MP3s that they ripped themselves, and
Okay.
the behaviors outpace their understanding. So it's companies like that. I mean, in a behavior that you could pick any company that's providing those kinds of tools, and
Right.
they are not able to keep up right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's you see, like we're not Steve, like, but yeah, I would love to see what Steve would do because, not to throw them under the bus, but just as an example, like Apple Music, when they launched, I felt like it was just the biggest stumbling block I've seen because uh, the they when they updated, it totally blew away their previous system of iTunes Match, which was totally I don't know, it was I wouldn't say crippled, it was just crumbling, and then music sharing between computers was non-existent. There was a feature that you actually share between your iPhone and your laptop is totally done. But dang it, if you they didn't want you to subscribe with their front screen, like right there when you launched iTunes, you need to subscribe to the music because then your music would come back. And then like, well, I already bought my music. Why do I need a subscription for it? And I think they're still reeling from that. And with all the players out there that you know, that we can mention forever, as you mentioned. But yeah, but I could definitely see where that is when you ask for behavior. It is a big important thing. So, um, but yeah, I could definitely see where you actually go out and say like, oh, how would user research be the fact that you would go out and just in this example, just ask them how they are experiencing streaming music and see and talk to them for a couple hours about their their routines, or would user research also involve just examining their day and just shadowing them for a day?
Those are both two good sort of those are like good thumbnails of different methods. So there's just many ways that you could go about doing this, and if you're going to go spend a couple hours with somebody, what are you going to talk about? Is it what they're doing? Is it why they're doing it? I've done some work where we looked at people's kind of overall music consumption, um, and their history with that. So where did it start from? What is it rooted in? How are they doing it? How is live music part of it? How is having friendships like, how does the social network that you're part of, and I don't mean that as a technical term, but as a sociological term, how does that play into how you consume music? Um, it's not surprising that music is a big part of identity, but so how do you kind of talk about those things with people? Um, so even just figuring out how to have that conversation. Um, yeah, and right, you can have people kind of there's a day in the life where you kind of spend the day with somebody, or there's a day in the life where you have somebody just it's kind of a question technique. Walk me through your day as kind of a question. Um, there's you can inventory questions, or like where you just have someone show you what they've got. I spent a couple hours in somebody's basement looking at the brand new room they had built to house their CD collection, which was a new CD collection. Like, and we hear about people kind of collecting vinyl
Right.
as sort of a new thing, but this was someone that had like flushed their entire CD collection and kind of gone to MP3s and then gone to streaming, and then had rediscovered and was kind of building it back up, and had this physical shrine in their house.
Wow.
um, it's a great example of what we didn't know that we didn't know. And um, yeah, so I mean, just to your point, like there's a lot of different ways you can kind of go at it, and see people's behavior, ask them to talk about their behavior, ask them to explain their history, ask them to talk about expectations for future changes to their behavior, not because that's a guarantee of what they're going to do, but because it reveals sort of unspoken values and sort of mental models that they have that drive their behavior. And you can kind of, depending on what you're actually trying to get at and what's most pressing for the team, you got to put together a set of methods that will address your, in interviewing users, I talk about the business question, which is what is it that we need to decide for our business? And the research question, which is what information is going to, from people, will help us answer that. And then the research methods are, well, what do we actually do in order to have a perspective on that research question?
Yeah. Just to get back to the early part, it's like, you talk about the people in the businesses don't know exactly what they, talking about. We don't know what quality is, or we don't have a firm agreement between ourselves what the customers deem as the important issue, like in terms of quality. And so in this day and age, where like you can have tracking of the user like into like a granular level in terms of what they're doing, and with RFID tags, and you can actually see where they're going within the store physical space. um, you know, it's still crucial, to go out and just ask people like what's important, like that's, I find like on one level I totally understand that, and then on a totally level it's like you have all this information, yet you just don't know how to ask the right question. And the other side is just like it's a simple question to ask, just like how's your day, like what are you doing with this day? And just, I feel like that's uh, it's a contradiction almost, like in a way. It's just like it's easy to understand, but also it's kind of complex in this day and age when we can track everything about a user.
Yeah. And what, interviewing is great for is to try to understand why. Um, and I think some of the teams that I've talked to do a really great job at taking their big data and identifying from that the gaps, and then filling that in. Well, so we know that we found these sort of surprising behaviors or curious behaviors, or ones that we want to try to change in order to accomplish some goal for our business. People are doing X when they hit our site, and Y when they with our app, and you know that's not what we want. So what's going on there? And so then yeah, how was your day? Why are you doing this? How do you use it? What value does it bring? What would be different? What's your that starts to give you some perspective on what you're seeing in the data, this big data that you can instrument. And it's great when they can work together. I don't think it's an either or. It really is a yes and. And you can go the other way too, right? You can do a more open-ended interviewing kind of exploration and find these behaviors, and then go to see what evidence you have for where that's happening or where it's not happening, and sort of try to either prove it out or again, it's just triangulating from different sources.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I definitely agree. Like you definitely want those in tandem, because if you definitely like we'll see people will say one thing and then actually do another thing.
Yes.
And that's like,
Yes.
I guess that's the hard part, is actually trying to explain why humans are those type of creatures. So.
And that's the classic user research question, right? Is like, we look at what people do, what people say about what they do, and what's different between those. And so, that's another reason to go out to where people are, because some of what you learn doesn't come from literally the words that come out of their mouth. It comes from the way that they say it, or what they don't say, or how they contradict themselves later on in the interview. Because what I would say to you in 5 minutes is different what that I would say to you after 2 hours. It comes from the other member of the household that kind of like swings by and says something. It comes from what you see in their environment. So you're given a lot of other kinds of cues to be able to try to answer the question that you just posed, which is like, why does people's behavior differ from what their stated behavior is? And a lot of it is about you know putting forth your best face and trying to present yourself well to somebody. And it's fascinating when you sort of stumble on a behavior or a usage activity that you never would have thought of as something that people would want to manage other people's impressions of. But you realize, oh, your tool is actually, um, inviting people to be presented as success or as failures to the rest of the world, and that you're not empowering them to be successful in these other softer levels, and that's driving them to not do something. So you can sort of dig into right what the data isn't telling you, but it requires sort of listening and filtering down to these other levels to really have a point of view about that.
And then I guess to filter out that way, like do you figure out like how many? I was reading these stories, and some people were, uh, you know, as again, come from someone who's from the outside looking in. Some of the stories began like, oh, we're in day 2 of our 3-week study, and then we're into, just reduced, interviewing 5 people or whatever like that. How do you determine the scope, like to make sure that you have enough of this, research to say like, oh, I can actually make a decision now? Because one story, I forget what the title of it was, that they were in like day 3 of this, and they were, it's like it's the first paragraph of the story, like it's kind of leading up to setting the stage for the story, but like you'd say like they were in kind of dire straits a little bit, because like there was the first few days, it was a slog, and they hadn't gone anywhere yet, any desired feedback. Like so, I forgot the phrase that they used, but basically it was like we haven't distilled the information to report back to
Yeah.
our client. So how do you know enough time is enough time? Like how did that person know they had something to take back to the client, or enough to take back to their office and figure it and
Right.
start researching it?
If that's the story, the one that I'm thinking of, it's I think the last one in by Steve Sato, who talks about uh, being in a village. I want to say in Kenya or something, and so I mean, so the delta between the team's life and the life that they were trying to understand was pretty enormous. Um, so I think you need to do more work to try to understand. I can't remember if it was about mobile money or what it was about, but if you're me or you, and we have our professional lives as we have, and we need to have some deep insight about how people are moving mobile money in villages in Africa, that's going to take more effort than to learn about, how are people using streaming music. I mean, it's just you have so much more context that is that's great. You have so much more context to try to get a handle on. So they, I think, invested heavily in doing that. They sort of knew in the planning that we don't know anything. We don't even know, like, how to meet with these people, how to talk with them. If you can sort of stage a project logistically, um, we can sort of envision how we're gonna do it. Then maybe less is required. Um, right, but how do you learn to scope it? Um, the sort of the anthropologist's answer is you stop doing research when you start getting repetition, which is sort of a and maybe if you are depending on how you sort of plan these projects, maybe you can just do that. If I mean, I work as a consultant, so I need to write a statement of work and put together a project plan, and get people to commit to something. Um, so part of that is a lot of work in trying to understand what are the constraints, how much do we know, how much do we not want to know. Um, Sometimes we need to do research in 2 different cities, for example, because that might be a logistical constraint. Oh, the team is all in this city, so we need to do it there. Or this city is the usage behavior is going to be really weird there because it's Los Angeles and everyone drives, or it's New York and everyone commutes on the train, or whatever it is. Um, so, I think the planning studies over and over and over again, you start to understand what these constraints are logistically, and how much is kind of enough. I think over time I've tried to do smaller studies. I mean, way back when, I remember being involved in a study of 30 families and how much they did printing or something. Um, and this just was a lot. It just took weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. Um, you know, I I guess two other points I want to make around this. I don't like to get drowned in the data. Like if I can't remember everyone's name or who said whatever, if I can't sort of if it's not a unit that I can sort of, I can't keep everything in my head. Like it's very rich, nuanced data that you have to go back through in detail. But if I can't sort of keep the structure in my head, at like 15, 16 people, that's a lot of names. It's a lot of anecdotes just to kind of keep your head around it. When we want to do a lot more research, then then you should do multiple phases. Do something, see what you've learned, see what your conclusions are, go back out. It's that repeat and iterate kind of cycle. And then another sort of adjacent point, which I think influences this issue of sort of how much is enough. I know I hear people saying, "Oh, I did this. I came back from one interview 3, interview 4, interview 1, whatever it is, and here's the insights from that interview." And I think that's sort of lazy and slightly dangerous language because it says that an insight is something that happens in a single interview. And I think, like we talked about collective nouns before, like with these stories in the book, that to me is where the insights come from. Like you get provoked, you get things to think about, you have sort of suspicions, stuff happens from interview 3 and interview 7 and interview 2. But you don't know what the insights are until you go through a more rigorous synthesis process and go back and kind of take these things apart and see what the patterns were and see what actually happened, which is different than what you remember happening. So yeah, you need enough that, and so what happens for me is like at the 3/4 mark is I start to be like, some of that starts to happen anyway for me. Because I'm starting to kind of accumulate a bunch of experiences that I'm not sort of bubbling up unit insights, but they are starting to feel kind of aggregates. So I think over time you start to learn what that is. And it's, for me, it's like numbers between 8 and 16 is a lot of data when you're kind of out talking to people. So like after hand waving and saying, "Oh, it's complicated," like I still can give you a range where it sort of ends up pretty often for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that was in grad school when I did analysis, so like trying to use your, user experiences as like, you see, you talk to 5 people for when you did card sorting, and then by a fifth per person, you pretty should have a idea, do some analysis on what they came up with. You should have a good idea what to make, and so you shouldn't have to it's like why 5? I don't know, like it just usually happens. If you go 7, you probably just waste your time, or you already have the information that you need to, or at least something actionable information to go back before you do another phase, like you mentioned. So
It reminds me of that Nielsen diagram that I absolutely despise. That I think has been showing for decades. That explains that you only need 4 people to do usability tests.
oh yeah.
And I think, it maybe intuitively it's true, but there's sort of a hubris in presenting that. It basically shows number of participants versus amount of insights, and I think he kind of shows like it tracks this way, and then at 4 it flattens. There's no units on it. It's just sort of a visual representation of a rule of thumb, but yet by putting in a graph, it's sort of, therefore it's provable because we have numbers around it. And yeah, so right, 5 people for a card sort, you start to have a good sense of what's going on. Then you can kind of go back and do some analysis. 8 people in the field, depending on if you're in Kenya or if you're in 3 different markets in the US or whatever your topic is, you start to have some handholds around this stuff.
Right.
It's not 100 and it's not 2, right? I mean, you can sort of see how it breaks at these extreme endpoints. But I think with experience, you start to learn how exactly to scope for this particular thing that you're dealing with.
Right. Yeah. I guess the more you're out of sync culturally, or if you will, as we use that expression, like the more time you'll need to take in terms to learn the insights that you mentioned. So
Yeah, I agree.
but yeah, cool. Yeah, and I just keep on flashing back to seeing Arrival, and like dealing with trying to learn the language, the alien language, and things like that too. So but in terms of like how long it takes to learn that new language, so that too. So cool. Also, I think it's a good stopping point because we mentioned movies. So instead of user research, but the book is. I want to make sure Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries, User Research War Stories. How can people get this book and find you online, Steve?
They can, yeah, they can find the book at Rosenfeld Media. Sells this and many other books, including my first book. And I think this is true. If at Rosenfeld Media, if you buy the print, you get the digital copy as well. You can also go to Amazon. You can buy at Amazon. You can buy either or the print or the digital copy, or you can pay twice. So those are kind of the two main places I think to get it. I think it's an iBooks, although there's some discussion of that. But those are the two main. On Twitter, I'm at Steve Portigal. On the web, I'm portigal.com. Yeah. You want to find me on Instagram? I don't know. Yeah. If you know my name, you can basically find me on any platform that I'm on.
Okay, awesome.
So,
well, thank you so much for taking time out today, and really appreciate you being here.
It's great to speak with you. Thank you.